The following is an EWTN special presentation.
Thank you very much. We now proceed to our third talk, continuing our theme of faith and beauty, with Dana Gioia, who I'm sure many of you have already heard of. Dana Gioia is a poet. He's published 4 collections of poetry, one of which, Interrogations at Noon, won the American Book Award. He began his education at Stanford and Harvard, took a detour into corporate life for several years and became a corporate vice president, and then left again to take up the pursuits of poetry, particularly poetry and culture. He has taught at many universities, including Johns Hopkins University, Wesleyan, Sarah Lawrence. He's now the Widmer Professor of Poetry and Culture at the University of Southern California. He was the head of the National Endowment for the Arts for our humanities for several years, and in so doing created one of, I think, the very largest federal program in literature and education. Incredibly accomplished. He will be talking to us today about the great divorce, Catholicism and the arts. Dana, just a pleasure, honor to have you with us.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. I know that we have been speaking without a break, so anyone who wants to excuse themselves momentarily during my talk, I will take no umbrage. The spirit is willing, but the bladder is weak. I am not a philosopher or a theologian. I'm a poet, a part-time professor, and an ex-public servant. It sort of sounds like the resume of a loser. But today, I've been asked to talk about a philosophical matter, namely beauty. It's a subject that we mostly ignore in the church, in society, in education, even in the arts culture. Beauty seems like a term that's almost quaint. A philosophical notion borrowed from another simpler age. We have mostly discarded the concept of beauty from current intellectual and artistic discourse, except as a kind of kicking horse in the academy. It's not a word used much by critics, even art critics nowadays, except ironically. When a professor says the word beauty, it has large quotation marks floating around it. But the absence of beauty as a positive concept has left a hole in our thinking, not only in philosophy and theology, but in education, politics, and civic life. It is not a concept or issue, I believe, that is of marginal importance. The absence of beauty as a positive concept is the central problem in our society, in our culture, in our education, and in our Catholic Church. Now, we don't have time here today to develop the concept in a philosophically rigorous way, and I frankly lack the expertise to do so. But what I want to do is just ponder it aloud and explore it in a pragmatic way, because I believe that the rehabilitation of beauty as a concept and a value would prove enormously beneficial to every aspect of our common lives. I'm going to build my meditation on 5 texts that span 3 millennia. First, from Psalm 29, I take David's injunction, "Give unto the Lord the glory due unto his name. Worship the Lord in the beauty of his holiness." Second, I'm going to invoke John Keats's assertion that truth is beauty, beauty truth, to which he adds, that is all ye know on earth and all ye need to know. Preposterous. Third, I'll consider Plato and John Hume's famous hypothesis that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Fourth, I will explore Oscar Wilde's assertion that man is hungry for beauty. There is a void. And finally, the great Russian Christian novelist Fyodor Dostoevsky's bold, truly outlandish claim that beauty will save the world. Now, since beauty is a concept that is badly understood or rejected nowadays, I'll need to define it briefly. The word is so commonly cheapened or misused in beauty parlors, beauty aids, beauty pageants, that it often seems like a marketing category rather than a philosophical entity. In fact, I was in Chicago recently walking on a street and I saw an Institute of Aesthetics. And I said, wow. Then I discovered it was a plastic surgery office. First, and most important, we must understand that beauty is not a synonym for prettiness or any sort of external quality of being decorous or pleasantly attractive. Beauty is something deeper and more comprehensive. Perceiving beauty, we have the sense of seeing something perfect in its own way, a perfection not only apparent on the surface, but a quality in which we sense the very heart of a thing. Beauty is therefore something we perceive both externally and sense internally. Think of some classical examples of natural beauty: a sunset on the ocean, a towering redwood forest. But the beautiful isn't necessarily even pretty. We see beauty in a hawk swooping down to seize its prey. We see it in the swirling cone of a tornado or a thunderstorm raging across a valley. The experience of beauty is a human universal, though some people have a greater capacity for it than others, and each culture develops its own code or vocabulary to express it. Beauty has an odd and singular effect upon us, so singular and significant, in fact, that our experience of beauty deserves some special attention. What happens when we experience the beautiful? I believe that the experience of beauty tends to fall into 4 stages. One, first, is the arresting of attention, a moment of stillness, an unexpected slowing down to saturate ourselves in a particular phenomenon. All of us are too busy. Is there anyone in this room who's not too busy, who's not so incredibly preoccupied with the busyness of their lives? And yet there are moments when our attention is arrested, we're stopped despite our best intentions. And this leads us to the second part of beauty, is a thrill of pleasure, an unusual thrill that seems disproportionate to the object's importance. Why would a bird, a bunch of flowers, a song, an image give us such joy? The pleasure is both physical and mental, affecting our senses, our mind, and our emotions. And this pleasure, and I think this is significant, has a strangely disinterested quality. We don't necessarily want to possess the object. We want to be in its presence. In fact, the word pleasure may actually be the wrong term to connect to this experience. What beauty gives us is a sort of mysterious joy, a complex emotion that, unlike pleasure, is usually beyond our personal power to control or possess. We can buy pleasures. We buy pleasures every day. We cannot purchase joy. And then out of this joyous pleasure comes the third element, a heightened perception of the shape or meaning of things, the thrill of looking beyond our normal sense of the world the vision that we get may be disturbing, such as the hawk swooping down on its prey, which shows us the violence inherent in the life cycle of the natural world. But this heightened perception is linked to a sense of truth, the deep and significant rightness of the pattern we perceive. We seem to see this beautiful and meaningful pattern unfolding in every aspect of the thing, creating a sense of unity in its variety, yet variety in its unity. We feel an illuminating radiance from the source of this beauty. It is like the vision of redemptive order in a fallen world. And then, finally, the fourth and most curious part of our experience of beauty happens. The moment vanishes. It is fleeting. It is beyond our power to control. We go from joyful elevation and sink back into the commonplace. We can stare at this landscape, this painting for another hour, but the nature of our experience changes. We have the memory of the moment, but the intense experience of stillness, pleasure, enlightenment is beyond our immediate grasp. Now, we all know how contemporary culture and cultural theory explains beauty. Postmodern thinkers do not consider beauty either a universal experience or a reliable means of perception, nor is beauty something that has any objective existence independent of the viewer. Beauty is a purely social construction in the eyes of the postmodern thinker. Beauty is an illusion in the eye of the beholder, a series of signs fabricated to create the impression of meaning, conditioned by social conventions, shaped by class, race, nation, gender, and ideology. A gesture by one group to raise its status and authority over another group. Beauty is all surface. Its deeper meaning is a social construction. Postmodern thinkers even have a wonderful term for beauty. It is, quote, a pleasure technology, end quote. It is neither true nor universal. It is a sort of consumer product, something made rather than discovered. Thank you, postmodernism, for this very neat and tidy intellectual strategy to reduce everything to political and social power strategies. The trouble is, this theory doesn't really feel entirely true to our experience of beauty, which so often has nothing to do with the assertion of our social status or the endorsement of some socioeconomic value system. Nor does postmodernist theory explain the frequently disinterested quality of the experience of beauty when we thrill at things that marginalize or threaten us. If you stand at the edge of the Grand Canyon and try to take in the sublime majesty of this spot, it makes us vividly conscious of our individual insignificance in the vast plan of creation. I would offer the hypothesis that the Grand Canyon is not a subjective phenomenon. It is not a cultural fabrication created to assert someone's social status. It is part of objective reality created by something or someone other than ourselves, to which we respond rightly with awe and wonder, and ultimately a sense of joyous revelation. And the experience of beauty in its most sublime state is part of that natural response. Objectivity and subjectivity are always interwoven in how humanity understands reality. Our current dilemma is that postmodernist academic dismissal of beauty has focused so intently on the subjective and culturally bound elements that it has lost sight of the central reality. I'd like to suggest that we ponder for a few minutes the classical and Christian notion of beauty, which has proved enormously productive for the arts and society for the most of the last 2,500 years. In this tradition, beauty is the pleasure we get in recognizing the particular manifestation of a broader universal order. Beauty is a true and powerful way of looking into the nature of reality. Beauty is therefore the most powerful and most natural way of knowing the world. This conviction has been consistently expressed in the Christian tradition. God intends us to recognize and love him through his works, even if we haven't taken a class in theology. As the poet Gerard Manley Hopkins wrote, "The world is charged with the grandeur of God." Beauty is our connection with the harmonia mundi, the essential harmony of creation, and it speaks to us in our incarnated humanity. As an expression of the divine will, the world and the cosmos are intrinsically beautiful. As God's creations, we have been made to recognize this. Darwin would have agreed, though he might have changed the wording, as the products of nature, we have been formed to respond to its structures. Art exists to please and instruct us in this type of recognition. Beauty is not something we manufacture. It is not a pleasure technology. It is something we recognize. Artists do not make beauty. They recognize and participate in it. They perceive the beauty inherent in the world, and they represent it in their work. Now, we can't talk about beauty without coming rather soon to St. Thomas Aquinas, who combined and reconciled the classical and Christian traditions to give the clearest and most persuasive definitions of the nature of beauty. He said, "Beauty makes us delight in the very act of knowing." In the Christian tradition, beauty is truthful, pleasurable, transformative, revelatory. It is our recognition of the deepest tendencies of the forms of the universe, the highest and most complete integrative level of understanding. The world is charged by the grandeur of God. It will flame out like shining from shook foil. The capacity to discern and appreciate beauty is universal. It is inherent in our human nature. Why would God, or evolution for that matter, give humans the pleasure reward of beauty? It cannot be either coincidental or unimportant, since this passionate response is both powerful and universal. People transfixed by beauty intuitively know something significant is happening. They feel a deep human hunger being satisfied, and once someone has experienced the beautiful, they long for more. Is there anyone in this room, is there anyone who has not spent a great deal of money to travel thousands of miles, often repeatedly, to be in the presence of something they felt was beautiful? As Oscar Wilde said, man is hungry for beauty. There is a void. People travel in search of the beautiful to fulfill a hunger for meaning. And here Thomas Aquinas has another compelling insight. He argues that the beautiful goes beyond the merely pleasurable perception of what is true. Beauty does not merely illumine, it transforms us. As it pleases and illumines, beauty elicits love. It brings us to love what God has created. Beauty leads us by pleasure to wisdom and through wisdom to love. And love transforms us. Now, you're a very polite and patient audience. You haven't had a bathroom break. And I'm sure at least half of you have only a modest interest in what I'm talking about. I mean, for God's sake, here's a poet quoting Aquinas, Fyodor Dostoevsky. I mean, beauty is nice, but it's soft and vague, a luxury, something very remote from a parish budget or a corporate sales target. These are the things that really matter, practical things, money, power, politics. Beauty is not something that grown men and women talk about, even in Napa. America has been a self-proclaimed and practical nation since the first Puritan settlers arrived. The Catholics didn't get, into the English-speaking part for a long time. The Puritans saw little purpose in beauty per se, and their pragmatism has been a great strength to the United States of America. Americans, especially successful Americans, believe that the important things in society are best expressed in ideas and numbers. The language of politics, business, finance, and science. These are great abstract languages that can literally move mountains or break atoms. But I would maintain they are not universal languages. The trouble with our practical American worldview, which I see everywhere in the Catholic Church, most of the world, nearly all of the time, understands things not as concepts, not as numbers, but as totalities. We live in a material world which, as incarnate beings, is made up of both body and soul, and we perceive it holistically, simultaneously with our intellects, emotions, physical senses, imagination, intuitive, and individually our memory. We most naturally and characteristically perceive embodied truths, not abstract ones. We instinctively seek beauty and not logic. The people who change the world make their impact by embodying their messages, by telling it in stories, songs, poems, images, and symbols. Social and political change is not driven by ideas. The social and political revolution of the 1960s, for example, was not created by ideology, although it influenced ideology. It was created by songs, movies, clothes, and haircuts. These were the things that communicated and convinced hundreds of millions of kids to change culture, morals, and politics. Their revolution wasn't about logic or practicality. It was about haircuts and hemlines and everything that not wearing shoes or a bra would communicate. It was a search for and a celebration of a new sense of beauty in a society which was unbelievably prosperous and practical by any historical standards, but no longer seemed beautiful to the young. Even in business, the understanding of beauty proves decisive. Steve Jobs claimed his central animating idea for Apple came not from studying engineering, but calligraphy, and realizing that the form of a thing shapes its function and meaning. The form of a thing expresses intentionally or unintentionally its reality, its essence. And almost everyone in society recognizes this fact, although most people can't articulate it or explain why. The failure of the public sector in the United States of America is embodied in thousands of ugly buildings and ugly public spaces. The contraction of the Catholic Church in the United States is embodied in thousands of ugly churches and centers. These places have been built practically, they are practical, they are functional in every respect except in practice, since they communicate to the average person that the citizen is just a number in a game of cost efficiency and crowd management. The experience that Americans have when they walk up the steps of the Lincoln Memorial is the experience of beauty, the embodiment of our political vision of the beauty of freedom and democracy, expressed in great architecture, great sculpture, great landscaping, and even great language carved calligraphically on the very stone walls of the memorial. This is the moment that Frank Capra captured so powerfully in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Now, those of you who, like me, have lived in Washington know that you can go less than a mile away and you can visit the FBI headquarters, which is disconcerting, dehumanizing, alienating. One wonders how any building, even intentionally, could have been that ugly. And it's no wonder that its brutalist exterior was used as a symbol for government deceit and heartless bureaucracy in hundreds of episodes of the X-Files. The architecture did not communicate a government of the people, by the people, for the people, but a government by secret police. The forms of things express meaning whether we intend them or not. When the U.S. was a smaller, poorer country, the public buildings expressed the greatness of our nation. Just look at a Depression-era post office with marble floors, carved wooden counters, brass fixtures, often an original mural illustrating the local history of a place. This was a vision of a beautiful society to which any citizen who entered could participate in. Today, the post office is all vinyl and plexiglass. It offers no vision except expediency. We are not citizens, but customers in a cut-rate 99-cent store vision of democracy. No wonder the American public no longer believes in its government. The government appears not to believe in them as alert, intelligent, sensory human beings. Until we discover how to embody our civic vision in beauty, the public sector will remain more X-Files than Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Man hungers for beauty. There is a void. If the state does not address this hunger, doesn't nourish this appetite, if it doesn't even acknowledge that it exists, then citizens become detached and alienated from their civic identity. They retreat into the private world. This is happening in exactly the same way in the Catholic Church, where fewer Catholics gather each Sunday at Mass, at least in part because the Church no longer offers them a beautiful vision of God's presence and their own existence, but mostly preaches abstract moral obligations and ethics. When Jesus spoke unto the multitudes, he did not lay out abstract laws. He hardly uttered a sentence of theology in all of his preaching. He told stories. He embodied truth in poetry. in beautiful language and images that arrested our attention. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Jesus did not ask us to think our way to salvation, but to see and hear and feel and taste it. Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. If we ponder these issues, I think we can imagine at least three key implications. First, there is a necessary and natural continuity between beauty and reality, and by extension, there should be one between art and reality. Beauty is not something manufactured but discovered. Art is our human means of expressing beauty in the fullness of its human meaning. Secondly, there is therefore a connection between art and truth. Keats was actually right in saying truth is beauty, beauty truth. And if beauty is in the eye of the beholder, it is as the beholder looks into the heart of existence. Thirdly, beauty is transformative. It leads us by pleasure to knowledge, and from knowledge to love. If beauty addresses our highest level of integrative understanding at how the world exists and what our place is in creation, then art is the universal human means of awakening, expanding, and refining this cognitive power. Art, unlike philosophy or science, speaks to us in the fullness of our humanity, is incarnate human beings. It simultaneously addresses our intellect, emotion, imagination, memory, physical senses, without asking us to divide them. The challenge of life is to find our meaning in a fallen world, to find the right way to live in a world that doesn't seem exactly the place that we were created for. In other words, to find truth, to live in consonance with it, and to find grace, and through grace, redemption. We have to do this not as bodiless beings. We are not angels, but as hairy, heavy, hungry human beings. Art is one of the ways in which we understand the world. It is, in fact, probably the most natural way, the easiest way in which we understand and feel the world. Beauty is the essential way we recognize the truth. For people of faith, beauty is how we perceive the glory of God. Give unto the Lord the glory due unto his name. Worship the Lord in the beauty of his holiness. When the church abandons art, when it neglects beauty, it loses one of the important ways in which its message is heard in the world. I would maintain that Dante and Hopkins, Mozart and Bach, Michelangelo and El Greco, Bramante and Gaudi brought more souls to God's than all the preachers of Italy. Beauty inspires us to transform ourselves and our world. It gives us the vision of our own possibilities. It is so easy to become distracted and exhausted by the countless tiny pains and duties of daily life that we have become dead to the miracle of our own existence. Art awakens us to our lives. It enlarges, it refines our humanity. It calls us to understand our complex existence. Its pleasure allows us to feel the truth of insights that we might not otherwise willingly embrace. Beauty inspires us to transform ourselves and our world. When Dostoevsky said, "Beauty will save the world," he was not issuing a social formula. He was uttering a prophecy. What he implied was that without beauty, there is no practical way to change the world. Without beauty, there is no practical way of calling all of humanity to God. No universal means of communication and inspiration will suffice without it. No more powerful way for humanity to know and love the good and the true. The world is charged by the grandeur of God. It is not an abstract or intangible grandeur. It surrounds us. We feel it. We need it. Man hungers for beauty. There is a void. We are drawn by our very natures to this grandeur, this glory, this beauty. We ignore it at the risk of misunderstanding ourselves, our world, indeed all of creation. Give unto the Lord the glory due unto his name. Worship the Lord in the beauty of his holiness. Beauty will change the world. Thank you so much.
Wow. I mean, that was utterly profound, and I just have to say I want that paper. I need it for contemplation. But for a professor who's not a philosopher, I'd say that was one of the most profound and beautiful metaphysics I've ever heard. I got about 10 takeaways from it. I mean, absolutely, beauty is the most natural way to the universal, and just pointed out so perfectly that therein lies harmony, and the harmony that points to the harmony of all harmonies and the unity of all unities, to God himself bringing on such a pleasure. It leads to wisdom, it leads to love, it leads to the heart of God, the only way of changing the world. Thank you very, very much, Professor Dana Gioia.